All right. So welcome everybody to our Apereo Microconference for July 2026. We're very happy that you could join us today. And we've been doing these microconferences for a while, and they're actually creating quite a buzz. So we're pretty excited about that. We do have a lot of activity happening with registrations and new projects joining Apereo. And we're very excited to tell you about one of those, a community of interest that's going to be joining the Apereo community. And I'm Wilma Hodges. I'm the Sakai Community Manager, and I'm also the Apereo Community Coordinator. And I will be happy to introduce our folks here, but just in just a moment. I did want to give a quick shout out to the Multi-Tool Forge. That's a new incubating project with Apereo. And if you attended our last webinar, I think I announced it a little prematurely because we had a slight name change. We are now Multi-Tool Forge. So if you're interested in that, it's a project centered around creating LTI apps that plug into any LMS. So the idea is to make them LMS agnostic. A lot of people have been developing them on their own campuses very locally. So we're looking to build a community that can develop them as a collective endeavor. So if you're interested, please visit the Apereo page that tells you a little more about our project. I'd also like to thank our microconference sponsors, JMA Consulting, that hosts our Civi CRM system, which you use to register for this session today. Our platform sponsor is Big Blue Button. That's our meeting room that we're in right now. And of course, the Apereo community that makes all of this possible. All right, so I also encourage you, if you haven't already, to sign up for our Apereo newsletter, and that way you will get notices about upcoming webinars and other events that are happening in the Apereo world. So if you go to our website, apereo.org, and scroll down to the bottom, you should see a Join Apereo Communications link, and you can register for the newsletter there. Today's session is Insights from Open Source Student Engagement Efforts at Georgia Tech. And we have today with us Dr. Jeffrey Young, who's a Principal Research Scientist at Georgia Tech, working with Partnership for an Advanced Computing Environment as their Associate Director for Computing Innovation. He's the co-director of the Scientific Software Engineering, or Center for Scientific Software Engineering, and the director of Georgia Tech's Open Source Program Office. We also have Alex Jenkins, a fourth-year computer engineering student at Georgia Tech, and he's the founder of LibreTech Collective, a student organization he launched in 2025 to promote free and open software on campus. So these are our two speakers today, and without any further ado, I am going to hand over presenter to Jeffrey so they can tell you all about their efforts at Georgia Tech.
All right, well, thank you so much to the Apereo community for having us today. I'm Jeffrey Young, and of course we have Alex with us. So our goal today is to kind of tell you about some of the student engagement activities that we have at Georgia Tech. I am the director and PI of the Open Source Program Office, and we'll tell you a little bit more about that. Alex is one of our standout students and also the current president of our student Open Source Club, LibreTech Collective. So he'll tell you a little bit about that. We'll give you a little bit of background and history and talk about some of the efforts that we're doing. Happy to stop for questions. I can't see the chat, so folks may have to raise their hand or stop me if you want me to stop on a particular point, but happy to do that. Okay, so we'll get started. So first of all, hopefully everybody here is familiar with what an open source program office is. Basically it's an entity that is kind of a center of excellence and expertise. It's not necessarily a group that's focused on, explicitly doing teaching or research, but it's meant to be sort of an organization that can have a lot of different functions depending on the institution. Recently, Sloan Foundation has been investing in academic open source program offices, or OSPOs. Georgia Tech was lucky enough to get a grant to lead that. I am the PI for that grant, and they also were awarded a renewal for that program in 2025. So that's basically answers the question of, why do we have an OSPO? I think this was not on our radar before the Sloan Foundation program, but we saw it as a great opportunity to extend some of the other efforts that we were doing. So who is the OSPO? It's kind of interesting. Ours is composed a little bit differently than other universities. At a lot of universities, the library actually hosts the open source program office. Part of that is because they're seen as sort of a conduit of knowledge and data. A lot of times librarians are not necessarily actively doing teaching and researching themselves, but they're very interested in things like licensing, storage and archival, and data management. So our OSPO has a couple people, obviously myself. Feng Liu is our co-PI and associate director. We have Ron Raman. All of us live in the research computing group at Georgia Tech. I am also adjunct with our College of Computing, as is Feng, but we're basically a group that focuses on doing high performance computing. So that initially is sort of a difference from some of the OSPOs at other universities. We have reached out. We have some great connections at the library. We have Cliff Landis and Dylan Hendry, who both look at things like archiving and digital archiving of materials. We also have some other folks that are doing sort of data management, data metadata type projects. I haven't listed those there because we're still hiring some of those folks. But we've had a kind of a great collaboration between our research computing, our college computing, and the library. So that's one thing that sort of sets us apart. And that kind of changes our focus on what we do as well. So what do we do? For our renewal, we had to come up with some goals of what we want to do. One of those is figure out what is the kind of long-term sustainability of the program. And so, that is kind of an overarching one that we're working on. But there are a couple things that we focus on with the open source program office. One is that we try to reach out to people who are doing open source, typically software development, so OSS, developer engagement. That can be both at Georgia Tech and within the community. One of the big things is look at some of the student programs, which we'll talk about in a second. Another kind of key thing that came up in the last year, thinking about open source AI. So how do we address the AI revolution and try to bend it towards a way that is more equitable and fair for everybody? And then the other thing is look at things that Georgia Tech is very good at. So we have a very strong cybersecurity department. We have a great focus on online teaching. And then we also have these ongoing efforts thinking about, okay, how do we manage data? How do we manage software? So if we look at these, a lot of these are already implicitly student focused. We have things like supporting developers. Those can be faculty and staff. A lot of times they're also students, especially at a university like Georgia Tech. We have our student programs. Those are explicitly student driven and student focused. And then I think increasingly, everything we do is impacted in some way by AI. So if we're thinking about, how do students more effectively use open source AI, that's kind of a key topic that our OSPO can lead on. Okay, so to get into a little bit more details, what specifically are we going to talk about today about how we support students? One of the big things is training and education. So sharing kind of best practices, teaching students about some, not necessarily the latest things like AI, but just some of the basics. How do you engage with and contribute to an open source project? What do you need to be able to do that? Things like funding support. We don't see ourselves as a fiscal sponsor necessarily, but we are an entity that can help faculty and staff and students find and obtain funding for doing open source work. A big one is open source, in this case, typically software community building. Part of that is we don't have a lot of open source data efforts at Georgia Tech right now, but we do a lot of things like workshops, monthly meetups, and different types of presentations for students to engage with the wider community. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, we kind of give it its own pillar, but open source compute strategies, things like software and hardware that increasingly are AI enabled. Okay, how have we done? We think we've done okay. So there's a couple things, we've done a lot of different classes. Note this is saying, okay, we might have a training session and, we've run that a couple different times. We're counting all those. But I think one thing that's really interesting is that we have been able to use a lot of our funding from Sloan Foundation specifically to support student projects. So you'll note here that we say financial support for about 80 students. That is primarily through our summer internship program. We'll briefly talk about that as well as some of the other projects that we have. And then I think we've been really successful engaging with different vendors and companies in terms of looking specifically at open source AI. So first I want to jump into training and education. That is kind of the biggest thing we do. I think this also explicitly supports our summer internship program. And you know, that is sort of one of the things that Georgia Tech values most when we think about students. One of our core goals is to remember that students are sort of our number one priority. We are a university after all. We'll talk a little bit about some ongoing work, but first we'll go into some of the training that we do currently. Okay, so if you go to the URL down the bottom, and I apologize, some of these slides are busy. I was trying to make them interesting with some of the graphics and things we had and represent some of the work that people have done. But one of the big things we've done, like many universities, is we thought about what do students need to know? And we know there's tons of great training online. There are tons of organizations that are doing training, especially on things like GitHub, on interacting with Git repos. That is important. We have our own spin on that. Some of that is because we've done Git-related training for a long time at Georgia Tech, but there's other things that we've noticed that students also need when they think about engaging with an open source project. So here on the list, we have 8 different lessons, but the things that we think are important increasingly are things that are also software engineering best practices. So things like, if you write code, is it tested? Increasingly important in an AI-enabled world. Do you know what continuous integration, continuous development is? Do you know how to use it with your GitHub project to make your life easier and to make your open source projects more sustainable? Do you know how to review code? I think this is a great one. We actually build off some other training from one of the Department of Energy programs, the Better Scientific Software series. But that, I think, is an excellent lesson because students, I think one of the things that we see is that they are really good at writing code. They're really good at making commits. But until they start reviewing code, they don't understand the complexity of, okay, if I give somebody a big pile of software and I say, please merge this into your open source project, what does that actually imply? And then some general open source topics. So things like if you're creating your own repository, as you grow the project, from one person to a couple people to maybe a large group, what type of open source governance do you need to do? What kind of training do you need to do for the people on your project, for contributors? And what kind of decisions do you need to make as your project grows into a larger community effort? So this has been great. Obviously we understand other people do some of these. We try to build on training where possible and not recreate the wheel. But we do have sort of what we think is an interesting take on this. We've been trying to think about how do we take this training, excuse me, and map this to something that we can do asynchronously. And you might say, why do we care about that? I'll tell you in a second. But we have sort of a student effort, and I don't have a picture of Moses, the student who's been working on this. But basically to take this training, it's already sort of Jupyter Notebook enabled, but create like an asynchronous training platform that we can run this with. One of the key things that we've noticed is that we have the summer program we'll talk about in a second. Georgia Tech has a very large student body. It is now up to 50,000 students. How can we actually teach all these students the key concepts? One thing that we're looking at, and that we'd be happy to partner with others on, is how do we actually take this nice open source training that we have that people spend a lot of effort to develop and create that into like a small program that people can go through and then maybe get some kind of certification or some kind of accreditation that says, yes, I understand the basic concepts of both software engineering and open source projects, so I can engage with open source ecosystems. So this is something we're working on. We're very excited about it. You'll see kind of, sort of a lot going on here on the right, but one thing is we're trying to build on other open source projects. So we're looking at MB Grader, which is explicitly meant for education and training. We have kind of our own tweak on that we're trying to use for our training, but that's something where we're very interested to collaborate with other folks on. So why do we want to do this? We'll talk about the summer program in a second, but there are two things that we would like to do with this training. One is that we would like to take the lessons we have, expand them with other community efforts. There's an explicit one in the US called NSF Intersect, which is focused on software engineering skills. We'd like to take that and make that a basis of an undergraduate course. Georgia Tech has this really nice framework for undergraduate courses called vertically integrated projects. We think this is a great format for something that is similar to efforts at other universities like RPI, which has the very excellent ARCOS project, and at University of Delaware, which has this new software engineering type course. Importantly, when we think about this training and the asynchronous platform I just mentioned, one thing that folks have said we would really like you to do is to make this available to our online master's students. That sounds easy. They're already digital natives. They are virtual, but there's 10,000 of them. So that's why the question of how do we actually scale this from, say, a few hundred students up to several thousand students, I think that's something that we're still trying to figure out. Obviously, things like asynchronous training and certification can help with that. But there is sort of this complication in terms of how do you actually match all of those students to substantial open source experiences. Briefly talk about funding. Mostly we'll talk about our summer program here. So I've alluded to it several times. We did have this idea when we started that we wanted to have kind of like an internship or open source engagement type project that we did for students. So we decided to do something that was sort of like Google Summer of Code. There are some tweaks on it that we do. As I mentioned before, we have this open source training that is a core component. We sort of assume when students come in that they have some base level of knowledge, so they are effective at using some kind of programming language. They, are at least familiar with Git. They don't have to be experts in Git, and we find that most students are, typically have varied levels of skills when they interact with tools like Git or GitHub or GitLab or all the different variants. But this past summer, for example, we had faculty mentors and some collaborators from IBM that decided to sponsor, to basically have mentors. We had 12 projects. The OSPO also contributed a project, which I won't really talk about today. But we had these projects, and then we had about 200 plus students that applied for this program. This is a paid program. It's part-time for 10 weeks throughout the summer, and we try to match 2 to 3 students per project. One of the key things we know is that we ask students to rank sort of the projects and say, okay, here are the ones that I am most excited about. So 1 to 5. That doesn't say anything about, how good the student is at that project or how good the project is. It's just how excited am I to work with this particular project. And so what we try to do throughout that selection process is to both pick students that have experience with that project's domain, experience with all the skills they need, and also pick students that are somewhat new to open source. So we try to get a mix of students. So this is not something where you're getting solely computer science students or solely software developers. You're getting kind of a variety of students, and that's where the training comes in, and it's very important. Last year we hosted about 30 students. We were able to do about 25 students the year before that. I think the really interesting thing about this program is that the variety of projects. So we've had things like quantum compilers, and we've had combustion codes. The example I have here is from the MSc project. This is one of the high performance computational fluid dynamic codes that was submitted for the Gordon Bell Prize, the biggest prize in supercomputing this past year. And we had students that were able to contribute to that effort in 2025. So that was really exciting. What have we learned? I think some successes. Most of the students kind of anecdotally have said, man, I really like the training. It's really helpful. We don't really have a good metric to say, okay, how much did you learn? It's not a course yet. We don't really have any metrics that we're applying to students. but I think definitely different students have got different things from different parts of the training. Our thought is that classes and certificate programs might help us actually get some metrics to say, are students doing a good job? One of the other really exciting things that I think we've seen is that students who were new to open source or students that were new to some of the projects as part of this program have continued working with those projects. And the faculty generally have been very excited. The faculty typically say, man, I'm so excited for the students I got. I want to hire them for fall, or I want to have them as part of my research lab. So we think that is a really compelling outcome from this program. One of the big challenges, going back to numbers of students, the number of students who are interested in this program is very large. We have kind of an acceptance rate of like 10 to 15% of the students who apply. And some of that is, we're using our funding from our grant from the Sloan Foundation. I think we are sort of thinking about how do we get more sponsorship from different, external sponsors and from faculty who are interested in having students working on their projects. There has been some feedback that Google Summer of Code has sort of a different process where students kind of explicitly apply to one project. I think we're interested in pursuing that, but we have to figure out how to kind of balance that with also giving opportunities to students who are somewhat new to open source projects and development. Okay. And I want to talk about a couple other things that we at the OSPO have sponsored. And these are just what we think are kind of cool tools that sort of fit under the community building kind of aspect of things, and training and education as well. One of them is this thing called the Open Source Project Explorer. One challenge that we've seen, and with other universities, they have used commercial tools to do this, is that you don't really know what open source projects are available at your university. So this tool specifically is kind of a self-hosted GitHub and GitHub Pages repo. It's worked on by the student named Kim, mentored by a software engineer, Kate Rushall. But this is a really interesting project. It is fully open source. You can go check it out. You can go fork it. You can rebrand it and use it yourself. But this sort of helps us do community building. And if people are interested in sharing their project, they can submit it and we can review it and add it to the page. And then the students can go and see, okay, what is this project? And then go and look and see, are they looking for student contributors and things like that. Really cool outcome from this. The student club, LibreTech Collective, they built their own version. And their version is actually probably, I would say, more comprehensive. Our tool is focused solely on Georgia Tech projects, and there's a very specific reason for that, which is that we are looking at sort of defining what is the community for Georgia Tech itself. But the LibreLinker tool is actually looking at kind of the broader open source community and looking at projects where sort of the maintainers have indicated that they are interested and willing to work with student contributors. So I think this is a really great evolution of what we did and then what the student club took and did on their own and kind of ran with. Other things we worked on, we've done some software preservation work. There's a repo down here at the bottom. There's this platform called Easy that I think is run out of Yale, I believe now. We've looked at some other different tools to do this. Part of this is the idea of how do you sustain open source software long term. So this is, I think, kind of in an intermediate state right now. We made sort of an initial release of some of these tools and some training to do this. We have two students, Saad and Ken, who worked on that. But there's sort of this bigger question that we haven't quite figured out. We have the tools, we have the capabilities to be able to maintain software, to be able to build sort of old versions of software and preserve it in some fashion. But then there's a bigger question of what do you actually archive? And this is really a question at Georgia Tech for our library. For an open source project for the community at large, it's probably a very bigger question of what do we actually need to maintain? Do we need to maintain every version of an open source project, or do we just need to maintain some key versions that we think are critical for the community to have access to? But very excited by the work they've done here. And then I want to briefly talk about community building. So these are things that we've done, kind of different industry sponsored events. I think one thing we've been really lucky is that we've had one or two corporate sponsors that have worked with us and that have had sort of a strong investment in open source technology. Now, you could say, of course, they are open source technologies that they are invested in and working on. They probably have some business interest in. That is totally true. But we've been lucky to work with some collaborators at IBM and have put together some really great workshops on things like agentic coding, sort of open source tools to do document processing pipelines, open source or open weight models, things like Granite, and tools to improve the reproducibility of AI prompting of projects like Malia. Some of the photos here, I think if you look real close, you'll see Alex in one of the photos. But one of the nice things about these is they've been very explicit about wanting to include students and wanting to have student talks and student lightning talks. So I think that's something that we're really always happy to help sponsor because it has sort of that student focus component as part of it. Other things we do, monthly meetups. These mix in some of our training things. Sometimes we talk about different funding opportunities, things like NSF has this POSE and PPOSE program where they fund open source ecosystems. So those are things that are open to all of our faculty, students, and staff. And we do get student involvement in those, and we get great questions from those. Things like poster sessions. We had one maybe about a year ago. One thing you might have noticed with our virtual summer internship program, it is virtual, it is online, it is run during the summer. A lot of people are sort of spread out throughout the summer. So the poster sessions kind of give us an opportunity to bring everybody together. And they do present their work online at the end of that program, but also to have them interact with people in person. We feel like that's very important when you do have these types of virtual programs to also have these connection points. And then finally, I would say, we don't directly support student clubs. Part of that is because student clubs are meant to be independent and have their own agency to do things. But we do try to indirectly support student groups like LibreTech Collective. Finally, I just want to spend maybe like one slide talking about some of the open source kind of compute resources. I think one of the big things that we've noticed is that Georgia Tech has invested a lot of time and money into working with specific vendors to use their AI solutions. And there is a lot of effort into looking at AI literacy, basically how and when should you use AI tools. One thing we've been trying to do is sort of complement that with, there's also sort of an open source path that you can follow that you can use outside of the university or you could use for personal projects. We're also involved in other academic consortiums, things like the Open Forum for AI, which is led out of CMU, and have been involved with supporting the OSI open source AI definition. And so there's a lot of great work that's going on there that I think is still mostly in progress, I would say. So just to dig down a little bit deeper, some of the things that we've supported, things like training and demos for open source RAG pipelines with open weights models and tools like LangChain and LangGraph. One thing to note is that one challenge we have is a student will work on something, and then about 6 months later, the way that you do that specific RAG pipeline or that AI workflow has totally changed. So that is a challenge with some of the training that we've done, because then we have to say, okay, is it worthwhile for us to go back and redo that for the new workflow, or do we keep showing the demo for sort of the old workflow? One thing that has paid a lot of dividends, we have worked with our research computing group, PACE, which hosts things like the AI makerspace, basically a large collection of GPUs that are meant specifically for student access. And so down in the lower kind of right-hand corner here, you'll see there's like an open on demand page, and you can actually pull up a Jupyter notebook that has an OLLAMA backend, and then you can run an AI model. Those are geared in a way that we're suggesting that people should use open source and ideally fully open source AI models, but typically right now open weight models, since that's what's most common. So things like Granite, I think some of the newer Gemma models, Llama to some extent, are all things that are available for students to be able to use on these HPC resources. There's an extension of this that we're working on, which is kind of an AI gateway called Spin. That hopefully will come online in fall 2026. Ron has been sort of putting a lot of effort into that. So that's been his contribution to some of these open source AI resources. And then I want to mention we have this great student, Dahiru, has worked on actually a CMU kind of front end for an AI gateway called DARE. And I put the acronym on the previous page, but I always get mixed up on it. So it is basically a research and education front end for kind of an AI platform. And so the idea there is that you might be able to use it to do something like maybe you want to take a bunch of papers and analyze them for some topic, and you want to do some summarization, or you want to do some deep research type analysis. The comparison I've heard is that this is similar to something like Copilot Studio. So this is an open source tool that sits on top of potentially an open source AI gateway on top of open source AI models. So the thing that we feel really good about is that we're providing kind of an alternative for students to be able to interact with open source tooling and models, in addition to the vendor provided ones. Okay. So I'll hand it off to Alex. I'm happy to answer any short questions, or we can save questions till the end if we need to.
It does look like you have one question.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
There's one question in the chat from Michelle. How did the Georgia Tech OSPO come to have that relationship with IBM? Did IBM come to the OSPO, or were you seeking these types of partners?
Yeah. I think we're very lucky in that Georgia Tech has some great alumni. One of those is Brad Topol, who's one of our board members for the College of Computing. He initially reached out. I think he's interested in sort of working with Georgia Tech, and so he made some suggestions about, okay, it'd be great if you connected with some of these other people, if you connected with some of these groups. Initially when we were starting the summer internship program, we really didn't know who was going to present projects, who was going to mentor them. Through our connection with Brad and our advisory board, the first year that we ran the program, we had a lot of IBM mentors that stepped up and offered to mentor students. I think we've had kind of a continued number of mentors that have continued in the past 2 years. We've also tried to mix in more Georgia Tech, faculty specific projects, because long term, we think probably this is a Georgia Tech faculty type driven program. But I think we were very lucky in that we were in the right place at the right time, and we did have some connections, but I think we were very lucky that we were starting this OSPO in the summer program right at the time when someone like Brad was like, I would like to work with Georgia Tech more. So that worked out really well. Yeah.
Great, thank you. We also had a hand up, but he put his hand back down, so I didn't quite catch the name. Whoever it was that had the hand up, if you want to.
It was Daniel Charles. I saw it.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, thank you so much, Jeffrey and Alex. And I wanted to say thank you guys for the brilliant presentation. I have a small organization out there in Denver. Usually I spend time in Africa working with universities. And one of the big things here, when I saw this opportunity, I wanted to jump on, is that there are a lot of conversations through the different African Students Association for using open source, working with partners, universities in the US and London and other places. So part of me being here, I wanted to see what type of opportunities you have for just, training and partnerships on these things, especially for students in Africa who are so behind, and we really love to see how they can work on catching up with some of these open source uses.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Yeah, so to repeat what I understand this question, how can we extend some of these training engagement opportunities, especially to students overseas and in Africa and other places? I think part of our thought from the OSPO, and I'll let Alex talk about LibreTech Collective here in just a second, is that we have sort of this training that we're doing in kind of an online first fashion, and we're trying to design it in a way where at some point you could kind of independently run it without us. Part of that is a bandwidth issue. We have sort of a limited number of people that run the OSPO. So I think there is kind of like a collection of those resources that might be helpful. In terms of student engagement efforts, probably the best thing we can do is sort of share some of the best practices of things that have worked really well for us, share projects that are sort of looking for new contributors. From our side, when we talk to faculty, we have had, I think, a monthly meetup maybe 2 or 3 months ago where we talked with faculty and we said, if you would like students, regardless of where they're at in the world, regardless of their skill level, to engage with your open source project, you need to have a variety of ways for them to engage. So that can be something as simple as looking at your open source project and seeing that you're missing some documentation. And maybe there's an issue on GitHub that they can interact with. And that's something that's real easy for them to kind of engage with and get a small win and kind of get a foot in the door to start engaging with a project. I would say too, happy to connect you. There is this kind of meta organization called Curious that I didn't really talk about. That is a large number of academic OSPOs. And I know some of them are very interested and are possibly already active with organizations in Africa. I believe a few universities there. So I'm happy to connect you with some of those folks as well.
That will be absolutely amazing. I appreciate that if we can get those connections, because just right on the 13th of next month, we having our first open source meeting with 3 different universities, and a lot of these students will be gathering. And the idea is they just want to be able to engage and start learning. And like you said, there are a variety of ways that we have to put on, because the obviously the learning curve is going to be steep for a lot of them, because we're talking about a lot of people who basically graduated high school, went to colleges without basically even doing nothing about AI. So we're just looking forward to see how we can accelerate reaching out to them with initiatives like these, and then just have people grabs onto it. But I would love to have the connections and any other thing. Yeah, like I said, I have my small organization in Denver. When I'm in the US, usually I just work with a lot of education institutions over there too as well.
Okay, great. Yeah. If you want to DM your information, I'm happy to follow up.
Yeah, I'm gonna put that. Let me see. Where's the chat? It's my first time using this software. I'll go ahead and put it in the chat right here.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniel. Yeah. Any other questions? I want to give Alex a couple minutes too, since he has a couple slides on LibreTech Collective.
Yeah, I'll DM you the information. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I'm going to hand it over to Alex, and then I think we'll have some more time for questions at the end here as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Young. Thank you again to the Apereo community for making the time to meet with us today. It's a huge honor. My name is Alex Jenkins. I'm a now 4th year here at Georgia Tech, majoring in computer engineering, which is a little bit different than normal computer science, which is normally just the principles of, the math and science that go behind making a computer program. Well, computer engineering is a little bit more about the actual solving of a problem of how do you build a computer. And that was kind of the mentality and focus that I wanted to bring to starting LibreTech. So around last year, around 2025, while working at Dr. Young's OSPO, during the virtual summer internship program as a student developer, I had an idea basically to just build a club developed by students that is leading students into free software and into open source software. What we do, though, is we do it a little bit differently. Instead of talking about openness and talking about ways that we can make things more open, we talk about freedom instead, which for a lot of students is much easier to grasp, especially when you're talking about devices that they may own. It's a lot easier to explain to a student that, yeah, you may have an open source app, but that app is never going to be truly free if it's on an iPhone, for example. So as a result, one of the things that we did with our app with our club was we instituted a policy where every project has to require the four freedoms. It has to approve the four freedoms: the right to run, to study, to modify, and share the code. But we don't have a preference on copyleft. We mostly chose to do this because we had seen that a lot of stuff since like around 2022. You'll see companies like OpenAI, for example, that have their name open that don't do anything open really. So we chose to use free, or Libre, as kind of the original term. Later that year, we were confirmed to be kind of the first club of our kind by the Free Software Foundation, the ones who got started doing all of the open source stuff back in the 80s at MIT. And then later this year, or I'm sorry, earlier this year, we ended up becoming a departmental registered student organization within the College of Computing at Georgia Tech, which basically puts us in the same unit as Georgia Tech's OSPO, but we're much more independent and we're completely student run. We are only accountable to ourselves. OSPO has a whole bunch of other policies that they have to go through that Dr. Young can gladly talk about, but mainly what we run on here at LCC is getting students interested in free software through four main pillars. The first one is a hackathon. The next one is a guest speaker or event. We've actually done a couple of these with Apereo before on campus, where we've just tried to get people interested in working on Apereo tools. We also do these things called homebrews, and I have a picture of one on a couple other slides in a few minutes, but we theme these around free software on campus, trying to get students interested in just sharing ideas. And these aren't necessarily always programmers either. What we also wanted to do with the club was make sure that when students are leading students, they're not always the computer scientists leading the non-computer scientists. It's mechanical engineers and nuclear engineers and biomedical engineers. And we actually do. We have all of these various forms of engineers that do software engineering just in their free time and just so happen to be passionate about free and open source software. And they've got a place and a home on campus at LibreTech. We have people ranging from PhD students, ranging in nuclear engineering, all the way down to mechanical engineers and biomedical engineering. And these are people that have literally some of like the most in-depth knowledge of programming, far exceeding my own, to people that literally have barely even opened Python before and don't know what public static void are or anything. So mainly what we try to do is also the last pillar, which is student-led free software initiatives. And we actually are currently sort of being sponsored by the Apereo Foundation right now through one of our projects called Quibble. It's through a joint partnership with them called Project Seniugum, where we're trying to federate out some of the parts of the club. And you'll see what we're really trying to do is actually what Daniel had mentioned, which is get people that maybe are behind or haven't really touched a computer like source code to be able to feel comfortable opening up that source code and playing around with it. And Dr. Young, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, please. Perfect. So our club is totally run basically on the principles of free, Libre, and open source software. You can find more about us on our main website, as well as librelinker.us, which Dr. Young mentioned earlier. And then we also, instead of doing most of our work on GitHub, we've actually switched to Codeberg, which is itself based on free software. And also is not nearly as much about, we're going to shove AI down your throat and going to make sure that everything is built with AI now. It's a much nicer user interface. So if you are tired of GitHub, I would recommend you play around with Codeberg, but that's a different story. A couple fun facts about us real quick, though, are that all of our club materials, ranging from everything from our constitution to some of our internal documents, just ranging on how we log into our systems, are all approved by the Free Software Foundation for Federation, which means that if you yourself know of a student who wants to get interested in building their own free software club on campus, please reach out to us. We would love to get them in touch and federate out. Again, like I said, this is a multinational and multi-institutional group of people that are trying to get this going. But what this also means is that since we are the first of our kind, we're also just so happen to be the first of our kind here at Georgia Tech. So as a result, we've actually been featured in everything from the front page of Hacker News to Slashdot to Its Boss, Phosphorts, Tech Rights, Tux Machines, both the FSF and GNU press publications, The Technique, which is Georgia Tech's campus newspaper, and many others. If you just want to do a web search of us, you can find us online. Dr. Young, if you won't mind going to the next slide, please. We're always looking for opportunities for engagement. We actually have opportunities for sponsors. If you have your own company or maybe a project or something that would be interested in trying to get some students coming on campus, typically all we need for that is just somebody to cover food and drinks for the actual students to show up. Mind you, this is a college campus. We are all very broke and we do like free food. So there is always a benefit to providing even just $100 worth of free food and drink. I assure you, you will get people to show up and people interested in your project that will start working out. Over to the right, we actually have one of our home brews. This was with Trustcraft, which is actually an alumni-led project, and Dr. Young might be able to talk a little bit more about that because he was the one who introduced us to them. But they are based in Silicon Valley, and they have been doing some amazing work when it comes to eliminating hallucinations around artificial intelligence. So we have had just about maybe half a dozen students commit to that project, and they've got 3,000 going on 4,000 stars now on GitHub. So they're a very big project. We do have over a dozen students that have committed directly to projects like GNU and TrustGraph, as well as many other on-campus projects. We have projects on campus. One's called Zap Studio, that is designed just basically to prevent bad JavaScript from being written. This was a project that was designed by one of our master's students, also named Alexander, and he ended up graduating, but he still works on the project at LibreTech all the time. And again, that's the nice thing is that we give alumni a way to kind of talk back to students in the community and touch back into start funneling more into the OSPO here at Georgia Tech. So we try to get the community engagement going, and then once we start getting some of that, as you can see, Dr. Young was in there. We have people to answer questions and all kinds of other stuff too. So it's really just we try to build the event as grassroots as we can, trying to make sure that whenever we do accept sponsorships, that we try to make sure that we distance ourselves as much as we can from them, so that we can continue to run things the way that we want to run them. And that is just continuing to promote an environment on campus of computing freedom, which is how the whole initiative of open source even got started. So I appreciate it. Dr. Young, I think if you want to go to the next slide, I think we're done here though. Yep, that's pretty much it for me. We do, however, unfortunately use Discord right now to kind of moderate and manage ourselves. We're working on a new program right now called Quibble with the Apereo Foundation, that's based on a couple of their projects too. The nice thing about Quibble is that it is 100% free software. And once we end up doing some sort of public beta release, we're probably going to start moving some of our stuff from Discord over to Quibble, but we are months away from being able to do that. So if you are interested in joining either of our communities, please join our Discords and we will have somebody be with you. We also have LinkedIn and Blue Sky accounts if you guys are interested in that. And I think we as LibreTech even have a Mastodon somewhere too. So I appreciate it. I will let anybody ask questions if they got them. Otherwise, I'll just kind of return back. I'm a student, so I'm going to be graduating in a couple months. As a result, I kind of wanted to give a little bit more of the time to Dr. Young, who's faculty and is going to be here after I graduate. But there is going to be a time where, I'm at the club and I'm not at the club. So I appreciate it regardless. And let's see if anybody has any messages. Yes. All right. So Chelsea, Alex, how did you first get introduced to free software and open source? Did you go to Georgia Tech intending to major in computer engineering, or did you come to the realization during your undergraduate career at some point? So I always wanted to be a computer engineer. I've got a bit of a crazy story when it comes to getting to college, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but when I was in 12th grade, my ACT scores fell off the back of a FedEx truck. And I got interviewed on the news for it. It was a big deal, but I ended up actually having to go to a local community college for a year here in Georgia before I could transfer to Georgia Tech, because at the time, if you were in the university system, they wouldn't let you go to Georgia Tech if you couldn't provide an SAT score. And mine just so happened to fell off the back of a truck. So it was a bit of a catastrophe for us, but I managed to, at that time, I went and I did a year at Clayton State University, which is down by the airport here in Atlanta. And I met some amazing faculty there. And that was right about the time that I started realizing I actually really like to do software engineering. I really like to kind of play around with the wires, and I've always had a passion when it comes to building computers, but it wasn't always programming them until I got to around 12th grade and maybe my freshman year of college when I got introduced to really, really powerful programming languages like Java. Java was really the first one that I got introduced with that I was like, okay, this is not that bad. I think I can probably do this for a living, which for a lot of people, they scream at Java, but not me, I guess. Um, and what really ended up coming to the realization that I felt that the school needed some form of open source or free software club on campus was in sophomore year. I ended up taking just a really hard class here at Georgia Tech after I transferred in C and assembly. And this was the class that like you took it and either you barely passed it or you didn't get out and you would change your major. And I had a lot of people in that class with me that were like, this is my second time taking it. I hate this. This is terrible. So I kind of made it a point my first time that I was like, I'm not going to struggle with this. I'm going to just really kind of buckle down. It was right around that time that I discovered basically the GNU projects, GCC and assembly reference manual. And that manual was so much better than my textbook at the time that I ended up later, a couple months later, when I got a job as a TA at one of the research labs, and Dr. Young can also talk about this, that I ended up kind of inspiring the professor at the time to write stuff that was all copyleft, that was all free software, that was all things that we would publish, and it would be Georgia Tech's name, but it was always be free and out in the open. And we called that AI fundamentals. But I ended up actually writing to Dr. Stallman about it, and he wrote back to me within a week. And within the span of working at the virtual summer internship and also doing some other stuff kind of over the summer, I ended up, well, it was actually the 14th. It was yesterday. That was our 1 year anniversary at LibreTech when I submitted all the materials. And we basically had a full year to, kind of come to who we were as a club. But we wouldn't have gotten started had it not been for my ACT scores falling off the back of my truck and me having to take a year out of college. So I know that was a very long and extraneous response. I apologize, but hopefully that answered it. There aren't just people like myself either that are passionate about it. There are people at the club that are just as passionate about this too. And that I think is what is really so unique about this club is that up until this point, there hasn't really been a really good campus run society for computer programmers who are interested in just showing off the best that they can possibly be. And that was the real inspiration behind LibreTech. So I appreciate it. Hopefully I answered y'all's questions.
Awesome. That's a great story. So
Thank you.
I'm glad you told us about the ACT scores. Does anybody else have any questions for Alex or Jeffrey? I see
David.
another hand.
Hi, I love that story, Alex. Hi, Jeff.
Oh.
I'm at the GW OSPO, George Washington University. Do you think that your student organization model is something that could be franchised to other
100%.
and how would that look?
So we don't really call it franchising, we call it federation, primarily because we're trying to do it decentralized and distributed. And that is really the main point, that you can't necessarily do some sort of like, you can't do some sort of chaperoning if you're going to do decentralization. So what we do is if you have students that are interested, typically when it comes to starting a club on campus, you need about 10 students. But you really just need the president, you need some sort of vice president and secretary and finance officer. So you need basically 3 students that are saying we're going to run the club, and then you need 7 others that are saying we're going to join the club. What we'll do from that point is if you get us in touch with the president, we can actually go out and share the documents with you. And these are the same documents that we're using right now for Apereo stuff, but that are also just so happen to be approved by the Free Software Foundation for use. So it's kind of bridging the gap here between the free software and open source worlds that have kind of drifted apart the last couple decades. But the main point is that it's all student focused. So as a result, what you would probably need to do is the head of your OSPO would serve as the faculty mentor. And this is actually what Dr. Young is to us, where you just serve as basically the advisor. If we ever have a question or, maybe we need to get to somebody in the College of Computing, we go to you and hopefully we can try to get something that's more unique than a email that's like, "Hey, I'm out of the office." So again, a lot of this is really just about battling bureaucracy, and that's what I've kind of had to come to realize the last year or so, just when it comes to starting this club, is that there's so much red tape that it really teaches you a lesson in patience more than anything. So I would say if you have students that are interested in it, please connect them to us. We wrote an article for it for the Free Software Foundation about a month ago, and it got published. It got written everywhere. But we actually outlined kind of the way that you could go about federating it and distributing your club out. If you're interested, please just send me a message and I can send you it, or you can just Google the Free Software Foundation and LibreTech, and you can find us there. So
Perfect. Thank you so much.
awesome.
I
No
will be
worries.
reaching out.
Perfect. Virginia.
Yeah, I think just to quickly add, there's some complexities with becoming different types of organizations, but I think, David, probably the best thing you can do is as Alex mentioned, assign a faculty mentor and help them navigate. Okay, how do I, you can look at kind of the example LibreTech. How do I do, something similar to that makes sense for my university? So.
Mhm. And it looks like we have one more question from Virginia.
Yes, hi. I can maybe even venture to turn on my camera. Let's see if that works. I'm on my phone and it's,
No worries.
oh, okay. I had a similar question to David, which is just kind of like I'm at the UC Santa Barbara OSPO in California, and I might be reaching out to you about like coming and talk to our students sometime. I think it would be
Wonderful.
awesome to like have you, so it's not just like me talking at them all the time.
Mhm.
I was wondering if you have a place where I could see your past like meeting topics and guests, so I
Mhm.
could just get more of a sense of like what do you guys actually do when you get in a room
Sure.
together and you have a meeting. I was wondering if that
Absolutely.
exists somewhere.
Yeah, so the closest that I think we do media dumps on our website. So if you go to our website and go to our blog, you'll kind of see just a list of everything from we have students present their own projects to we have companies that will come in and kind of talk about their own open source stuff that's going on. That would be the Trustcraft example, for example. But we've really got the whole range from community to corporation. And that I think is the really pivotal part, because a lot of the time when people talk about open source, they're really just focusing on that corporation part. And unfortunately, a lot of people forget that the community part is where, all of this really began. It was where Linus Torvalds got the idea of doing it. Both Linus Torvalds and Werner Koch got the idea of doing their own free software projects at universities. So for me, it is very pivotal that we teach these ideas of making sure that computers remain free and open and inspectable to everyone. That it kind of drives the club. So, oh, and perfect. Miss Michelle just shared our web link too. So
Thank you.
wonderful. Thank you.
All right. Well, you have a collection of links there in the chat if you want to grab those before you leave to be able to go to their website and download some of the documents and check out what's on GitHub. So I'd like to thank our speakers for sharing all this wonderful work that you guys are doing. It's really great to see students so involved in projects, and it's really all part of what we want to promote as, kind of revitalizing the open source ethos. So we very much appreciate you being here today and presenting for us. And if you have any questions for our speakers, feel free to let us know. We can put you in touch with them if you need emails or whatnot. So again, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out. And thank you again, Alex and Dr. Young. It was a great presentation. Really enjoyed it.
Thank y'all. We really appreciate it. It was an honor.
Thank you much. Thanks for all the great questions.